Tom and Carole, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing your transparent journey that we're going to walk together on. But you have started The Landing, which is at the Come to Go Ministries. And I'd like you to just sort of describe what that is before we get into your story.
It is a place where these teenagers who they come from all different backgrounds, all different types of issues, but they feel accepted, they feel loved, and there's just a peace in that facility, and there's a joy in that facility. I was just looking at it the other day, where it's basically Celebrate Recovery for teenagers.
Teens.
And it just really is embraced by these teenagers. They're coming from group homes, from Vincent Village, which is a homeless shelter for families, from alternative schools, and you would think that because of their backgrounds, maybe they wouldn't be interested in learning about Christ, but the exact opposite is true. For whatever reason, these kids come and they keep coming back. They enjoy it. We had, and so we're walking them through the 12 steps of Celebrate Recovery, and in doing so, it's just been an adventure.
And so you teach the Bible. Do they have music too?
We have music, and it's a C2G music hall, and I started trolling for talent on their open mic nights, and I was able to get several of local talent. There's just young, like there's a 14, 15-year-old girl named Addison who sounds like she's 30. She's incredible. There is a blind woman named Rainey Purdue who comes and sings, and she's just absolutely phenomenal. And then Lydia Kay from Auburn. She's got an album out already. And so God, it's just like the rest of the program, God's teed up all this talent and these resources in a way that you can never have imagined.
That's awesome. And it's an outreach of Associated Churches?
Yes, it is.
Carole, what's your role at The Landing?
Well, it's actually a neat story. When your husband says they're going to do something, you say, okay, well, I'll come. I'll help support. I'll give you 3 months. My gift is hospitality. And one of the components that we do is every week we provide a meal for the kids. And it's not just pizza. We do a really nice nutritional meal for them. And the very first night that I was there, I had a young man come up to me. And I asked him, I said, well, how does that taste? And he said, oh, it's the first home-cooked meal I've had in 3 years. And it was as if I was looking at Jesus saying to me, this is why I want you here.
Wow.
And that night, I turned to Tom, and we're at home, and we're kind of unpacking this just amazing journey of what it looked like. And I said, okay, I'm all in. I'll be your small group leader, whatever you need. And so it's advanced that I provide meals, I do lessons, help run small group, and we do it together.
I think I've heard you provide meals outside that venue too.
I do.
I want to check to see how to get on that list. Well, Carole, could I start with your story? And you guys are going to meet at about 27 years old, is that right? At a company?
She was 25, I was about 27, 28.
Oh, look at you. Oh, that's nice. Okay, so we'll get Carole to that point, and then I want to get you to that same point where your lives intersect. Sure. Okay, Carole, could you talk about your background?
Yeah, I was raised by a single mom. My dad was an alcoholic, and I didn't have a relationship with him. I didn't start having any interaction with him until a life event happened for him where he had a associate of his actually douse him in gasoline and set him on fire.
Your dad?
My dad. My dad ended up in the VA hospital with over 3/4 of his body burned. And it was at that point that my mom took me to the VA hospital after he was able to have visitors. And it was my first real interaction with him for years, since I was 2 when they were divorced. And it had a really big impact on me. I was probably 8 or 9 by this time. And I just quickly realized that I would never really have a relationship with my dad. And my mom loved me. She was wonderful, but she just had some life issues that she hadn't worked through, and so we had just a tumultuous relationship. And I was raised strict Catholic, and this is back when you went to Catholic service every day. And by 16, I rebelled, and I started drinking and doing drugs, and ended up with an eating disorder. Ended up in a treatment facility for that.
Was it anorexia and bulimia both?
And it was through there that I even met more contacts to continue down that path. I'm very blessed that I didn't develop a problem. And at 17, a light switch kind of went on, and I just left. I left my hometown. I moved to another area. I wanted to get away from all the elements that I had gotten involved in. And I know I believe in guardian angels because I found a phenomenal job. I started working with special needs kids, and I did that for 5 years. And
Is that in Massachusetts?
It is.
And you grew up in Decatur, Illinois? Okay.
yeah. But what I really did is I started substituting some rebellious behaviors for different coping mechanisms, workaholism, materialism, and I moved back to
I've
Decatur.
been there.
I moved back to Decatur at 21 because I wanted to go back to college. I got invested in fine dining and became a manager, and decided hospitality was where it was at, and started doing that. And that's actually how Tom and I met, is he came into the restaurant that I was managing.
All right. Let's get you to that point.
Okay.
So you grow up in Philadelphia?
Philadelphia.
So that's a little bit of that accent
Yes.
right here?
Yes.
And you grew up Catholic?
Yes.
Talk a little bit about your childhood.
Well, I was very at a very young age. I was a pretty intelligent kid, but a very isolated kid, and that was self-imposed. I was a bedwetter, and so as a child, I was always ashamed of that. So when other kids in our school would be going over and spending nights and stuff, I was always like terrified of that because I'd get caught, get in trouble, or whatever. So that created this space for isolation. So I became a very observant, like, questioner, and it was a strict Catholic school. It was all boys school, uniforms and all of that, and the nuns' answers for most of the questions were, well, it's a mystery, type of thing. And so what happened was I remember like third grade having this observation where I was like, most of these kids are in this school because their family is Catholic, and these boys like this music because their older brothers like this music, and most of the people in the neighborhood like the Phillies because that's our neighborhood. I said, I'm not going to become a victim of my environment. I'm going to wait until I'm old enough to know better before I really get vested in anything. So and that was purely a defense mechanism, a coping mechanism. It's like justifying my isolation. So with that isolation, started filling that in with other habits. At a very young age, I was introduced to pornography. Alcohol was introduced 14, 15 years old. Prescription medications by the time I was 17 years old because I did have an eating disorder also. And then
what was your eating disorder?
Oh, it was bulimia.
Really?
There was everything for me was binge and purge. Everything.
Okay. Really?
Oh yeah. Same thing with pornography. Can't touch it, but then binge, purge, and then food was the same thing. Alcohol was the same way. And then got into school, college. I went to Switzerland for a year, and then my uncle, who was an alcoholic, he passed away, had a heart attack.
Why'd you go to Switzerland for a year?
Oh, it was a school program.
Oh, really?
I went to LaSalle University, and it was an exchange program, so I was there for a year. And while I was there, I was still on my meds, and I was still this binge and purge type, cycle. But then he had a heart attack, and so I quit drinking at that point, and I was smoking at the time also, and I quit smoking. I was like, I should clean myself up, and then I was a little bit more.
All because of him having a heart attack.
Yes.
You're saying, okay, I'm going to get my life cleaned up.
Yes,
Okay.
it seemed to make sense to me. So by the time I got back from Switzerland and I'm a senior at college, I was a little bit more serious, and I had a game plan about what I wanted to do and what company I wanted to work for. So I got serious about that, and that kind of took off. I finished up college, jumped into a large manufacturing company, and was on a fast track there. And then my main medication, I still binged and purged in a lot of different areas, but my primary form of medication was work, like workaholism. And I was kind of a fixer, like they would throw me in different projects without much training, chaotic environments, but because I was on Synthroid, which it was thyroid medication, which acted like speed for me. So I would work all week long without any sleep or very little sleep.
Is that the prescription medication you were getting?
Yeah. And so that's why I was using it to work more. I really shouldn't have been on this stuff, I don't think.
Okay.
And so, at a very young age, I was put on top of like $1 million projects with no training. It was like, hey, you've got $1.5 million. You don't have enough time, don't have enough money, go ahead and do it. And it's just like, okay. And then that was my learning, is trial by fire. And then I saw this one, they were bouncing me around the country, and then I saw a position. I was at a strategy meeting, and I saw there was an opening as a plant superintendent in Decatur, Illinois. I'm like, I want that job. That's my next job.
Where are you at that point? What city?
I was in Philadelphia, or traveling around. I was on a development program that had me in Texas primarily, Dallas, Texas at that time, and then I was back in Philadelphia for a strategy meeting, and I saw that position, so I said, I want that one next, and I kind of gunned for it, and I got it. So by the time I was like 26, 27 years old, I was superintendent of a manufacturing facility, like 80-person, 3-shift union facility. And it was, again, it was another turnaround operation, and it was very successful.
You're doing well.
Very well, very well.
Wow.
Yeah, work-wise, I was doing great, you know.
Wow.
And I had everything on autopilot. I mean, by the time, after about 3 months, we went from a productivity of like 57% to a productivity of like 85%, where we're no longer, you know, doing overtime. The plant's a lot more profitable. Within about 6 to 8 months, it's on autopilot. And I'm like, well, what am I going to do next? You know, so I jumped into University of Illinois to get my MBA.
Really?
Yeah, because I had so much time on my hands. Everything was running so smoothly, you know.
Are you getting compensated well?
Yeah,
at
I was
the
getting
time?
compensated very well.
Seems like you would be for
Yeah.
what you just did.
And then so, but what happened was, that's what started getting disenchanted with the corporate world, because at that time it's a large blue chip company, and it was 1999. So it wasn't a .com company, so that was frowned upon. There were some other legal issues they were having from an investment they made like in 1960, like an asbestos thing that kind of was in the background. So that kind of had stock issues, implications. So you start seeing this corporate politics that really got me disenchanted, and they started making decisions. Like they yanked out preventative maintenance programs that I had put in place in order to make more production, and so just the plant just started dying, you know. And so here I went from, it was really funny because I jumped into getting my MBA because everything was on autopilot, but when they yanked out these programs, my workload increased. So now I'm working 60 hours a week plus working on my MBA. And so I was like, and so I figured I'd stick around until I got my MBA and then decide on what I was going to do next. And then so it was in that time, it was in that bridge there is where I had met Carole.
At a restaurant?
At a restaurant.
Where you're
yes.
working?
Yes.
And is it love at first sight, or what happens?
Oh, yeah.
We actually had a whirlwind courtship. From our first date, November 11th, we were engaged December 24th, and we were married October 15th.
Oh, my word.
Yeah.
That's
It
flying.
did take him a couple weeks to get me to actually say yes to a date.
Wow. And so you know she's the one.
Oh, yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
Well, what's it like when two workaholics get together?
There's a lot of medication. Primary medication became alcohol and work, you know, so I wasn't taking the medication anymore. I didn't have the eating disorder anymore. I wasn't smoking anymore. So what happened was, you know, it was work, school, and then after I was done, I'd go and help her close her bar. I mean, our apartment was right across the street from where she'd worked. And then for me, like after I finished up it was pretty bad. I mean, between the corporate world was getting bad enough, but then what happened was I got disenchanted with the corporate world and got into privately owned businesses, and then it became two bad habits. You know, I was working like 14, 15 hours a day, and then I'd walk right across the street and start drinking. So
With her?
No, like she would still be working, and
That's what I mean, but in that facility.
I was still with her.
There's such romance when you first get married, and Tom's family was real different than mine. My mom was a single parent. My grandma was Baptist, but she was a Puritan first. I think she was a Puritan first. And so like alcohol just wasn't around in the equation. And then I meet Tom's family, and it's the very first holiday, it's like cocktailing by 2:00. And I'm, oh my goodness. But I'm in the height of hospitality phase, and that's just accepted. You know, you have a great meal and you have a glass of wine, or what's the pairing like? And his family's very celebratory. I didn't realize the dysfunction at the time that, you know, you're probably having eggnog at 3:00 is not the healthiest decision, but our lifestyle really became very party oriented. If we weren't working, we were partying. Then we were also dealing with my need to really be loved and accepted. And that was something that I still hadn't really dealt with from not having a relationship with my dad. And I wanted to be accepted. And so we would do things like I would throw elaborate parties because I was gifted at hospitality, but it was to fill a need of just acceptance and love and to place value on who I was. And so then there became a conflict between us because Tom was antisocial. Tom didn't want people. In fact, he said to me when we were first together, I don't need anybody else but you. And that was kind of scary to me because I love people. And so there was a lot of early conflict when we were first together. It's this party atmosphere, but the only way that Tom could be comfortable in that atmosphere that I so craved with acceptance and validation was for him to get loaded. And it wasn't that it was just the social cocktail. Tom would, sit down with a highball glass of vodka on the rocks, and there was 1, 2, 3 down. And 15 minutes later, I'm like, what happened to Tom? And so we really saw that change from not just partying, but then we saw the dysfunction happen a couple years in. And then added into the mix, we didn't have kids. So we were allowed the opportunity to work really hard and then play really hard.
And you're drinking too, and the playing really hard part.
Absolutely.
Wow. So what happens next? Do you move from Decatur?
Well, it was 2004 to 2008 was where I was working with this one private company. And 2007, around Christmas time, Carole really likes to decorate. So, I'm sitting in our living room and we have a fireplace and there's a Christmas tree on either side of the fireplace and all this elaborate fabric and candles. And I lit all the candles and I take pictures of it, and Carole goes to sleep and I'm drinking this huge magnum of wine, and I ended up passing out before I blew the candles out. And so come 2 o'clock in the morning, Carole's waking me up because all the fire alarms are going off. And that whole fireplace thing had caught on fire. And so she put it out. I was kind of in a stupor. And then the next morning, it was interesting because we're trying to justify, hey, what happened? Was it the Christmas lights? There was a lot of lights. And then I'm just looking at all these candles with I didn't recall blowing them out, but then really when I saw the evidence itself.
Well, he's looking at pictures. There's nothing left of the wall.
There's nothing left of the wall.
He's
I'm
looking
looking at all the melted candles and seeing that there's no candles left on the wick, and it was all melted down. I'm like, Carole, I said, I didn't blow them out. I said, that was me. And so that was kind of a flag that I had an issue. And
kind of a flag.
Well, that was a turning point for me because I had been unhappy for a while, and I had started seeing a therapist really to deal with some of my own issues that I knew. And I'll never forget, but her name was Aurelia, and she said, you're trying to fill the God hole. I was really trying to work on my materialism.
She was a believer.
Oh, she was a believer. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I was really struggling. I was still angry at God. And it's only now in my 40s that I can recognize how deeply disappointed that I was in him. Like, why? And I didn't realize, and then I had my mom in the other ear going, you just married your father, look at that, here. And so history's repeating itself. And so I started getting healthy. And at one point I bring Tom to a therapy session and I just say, you've got a choice. And it's just like you and I are talking right now, Mitch. I said, you've got to choose. You can either work on our marriage and stay married to you, but I'm done. Like, this is it. Like, this is not healthy. I'm worth more, you're worth more, and something's got to change.
What'd that do to you?
Me? Well, there was about a year where after that fire where we were trying to, and I'm not sure which session she's talking about, but let's say there was a year, 2000, I tried to moderate. Like, I was on medication, I was seeing a therapist, and she's like giving me profiles and stuff like that, and she was just completely lost. She's like, I don't know what kind of personality you have, So it was about a year later where we just realized I can't moderate. I'm just better off not having it. That was when Carole did give me an ultimatum, and I was lying basically. We went back to Philadelphia for Christmas, and I was drinking non-alcoholic beer periodically, but then I'd slip in a real one, And then while we were there in Philly, I went over to my sister's house, down to 6-pack, went back to the house, and I'm like blotto, and Carole's like, she could tell. And she's like, you've been drinking. And I'm like, no, I haven't, and I lied to her. And so that was a big thing for me. That was the realization to me. I was like, wait a second, I'm lying to her, which means I'm lying to myself, which means, that any fabric of integrity I thought that I had, that wasn't there. So I was hiding, and so that was an eye opener. And then Carole, on top of that, there was that ultimatum. I said, okay, I'm done. I quit drinking. So I was just done.
And I think too that the power of that statement for him was Tom had always been really proud of the fact that he never lied. Like he would tell people, "Oh, I always tell the truth because I can't remember anything." Like that was a big sticking point for him. So for him to have that recognition of I just now broke something that I value and I talk about, I think that was for him that was really his rock bottom. And that may not sound extreme for some people, but if your word isn't your word, then what do you have?
Right. So do you stop drinking?
I quit drinking, and I quit drinking cold turkey. And then what happens was, without that medication, I started struggling with all this pent-up anxiety and depression. And so that's like 2008 is when I quit drinking, and I start struggling with that anxiety, with that depression. And then my work, my ability to work the way that I had started going down the tubes because I couldn't make those calculated decisions anymore. I was more concerned about people's emotions, what
You
they
weren't
thought
numb
about me.
anymore.
Yeah, I wasn't numb anymore. And so it went to the other end of the spectrum where now it's like, now I was paralyzed. Like I can't, I may hurt that guy's feelings. I can't make that call now. I mean, before I'd fire people without any problem, hire him, fire him, didn't matter. Now it was like, oh, I might upset him. And so what happened was my productivity had really dropped, and plus I was used to being in these dysfunctional environments, and it was a very dysfunctional environment that I was in. It was two brothers who owned a company, and they were constantly arguing, and I was like the monkey in the middle that would vote one way or the other, and I couldn't deal with it anymore. And so finally, after 4 years, I hadn't taken a vacation really. And so I said, I walked out and I said, I'm taking a vacation. I told the people that I hired. By that point, I had hired about 50% of the company. And to my two main people, I said, I'm going on vacation. When I come back, I'm either going to get fired or I'm going to quit. Either or, I can't do this anymore. I ended up getting fired. And so it was interesting. So some people get fired for drinking on the job or whatever, or for alcohol. I got fired for not, not drinking, And that was huge for me. That was very, very difficult for me because I was a workaholic. I mean, I was a workhorse, and
Your identity was
was there, definitely.
And we're at kind of a pivotal point because I had just recently made the decision with Tom's support to leave a career that I had been in to look at opening my own event planning business. And so now here, this is something that just happens. And so I don't have a job. And then he's let go. And then we're faced with the fact that we have high credit card debt because of my spending. And then it takes Tom's not able to find a job. Like we can look back now and see that God's hand all along was pushing and pushing and taking everything away from us that we placed value in. But at the time, it was awful. Tom ended up taking a job in Philadelphia, and I was still in our hometown of Illinois trying to get the house sold.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
And we were separated for over a year and a half.
You were.
Yeah. So basically, it was at that time where I took that job in Philadelphia. The plan was Carole would sell the house in Decatur, Illinois. I'll move back to my parents' place and get the job, find a house as she sells that other house. While I was there, I was seeing a doctor who said, Tom, you're riddled with, you got anxiety, you got depression, you got ADHD. So they put me on Adderall and Zoloft, and it was the first time, like in forever, where I actually felt like normal or felt good. So it was a huge blessing. But I didn't use it for any recovery work. All I did was use it to fuel my career again and my workaholism again. So again, without Carole being there, without me needing to be social, I was pulling all-nighters, working on spreadsheets and databases, trying to, improve the place that I was working at. And so that had a 1-year contract there, and they didn't renew that contract. And by that time, I was just like, you know what? I know enough about this industry that I'd be a pretty good consultant. I had enough contacts, and I had worked on so many different facets of the industry. So I just started trying to consult people, businesses. But then every business that I went to consult at, they would just hire me on the spot. It was pretty interesting. And so I worked at one business for a while. It was a 3-month deal. It really didn't pan out. The culture wasn't there, and they were a lot smaller than I was used to. But then another one, a company that was here in Fort Wayne, they hired me, and it really worked out well because at that point I was in sales.
Are you reconnecting now?
Yes, at that point I was in sales and I could work out of my house. So I was able to move back to Decatur, Illinois and kind of settle things up again. For a year I was in Decatur and then Carole got another job, and then that career path took off. I was doing very well for that company, so much so that the gentleman who owned the company said, I'd like you to move to Fort Wayne to run a customer service department. and we basically, within about so I did that. We moved to Fort Wayne, and within 3 months, the sales were projected at like 80 million a year. By the within 3 months, it was projected at like 100 million a year. And that was, I'm not going to say that I did anything. That, I mean, I was the guy on the dock who was getting thrown the rope for the yacht. You know, I mean, he was planning on selling it, and so that company got sold. And when the private equity firm picked it up, I was one of the first to be let go.
So now we're in Fort Wayne.
Yeah.
I didn't want to move here. I've now left a really good job. I'm angry. I'm disappointed. Tom is in the deepest depression he's ever been in. And through the company that he was at, we had heard about the chapel. And we started going.
A church.
Yeah.
And looking back, every single step was part of that process. But after the last place, it had been a series of events of where Tom had just one more step away from relying on career, self-reliance. And I think that's for him, and I didn't even know at where he was at level-wise. I was battling anxiety terribly, depression. I didn't even know that he was contemplating suicide at that point because we had no contacts. We had no network here. There was no resources. Every career or every position I've ever held has been because somebody's approached me, because they've learned of me or my work ethic. And so I'm in a brand new place and I have no network. How am I going to find a job? Because that's my entire career has been that. Tom is filling out resume after resume. No doors are opening. Every place that fit his profile, nobody was hiring, or at least not with him.
Well, there was a period where I was doing some consulting in between that. And so that was the travesty was here I moved Carole here, and then the consultant client that I picked up was in Chicago. So I'm like driving to Chicago and then leaving her here while I'm in Chicago like at a month at a time. And so basically, and then it started falling apart, and it was like May of 2013, I think it was, where it was May or April around that time where, you know, my car gets stolen.
April Fool's Day, I think.
Yeah, April Fool's Day, yeah. It was like a Mercedes, like an SL 500, that got stolen while I was in Chicago. And then, so I'm just still figuring things out, working for this client, and that wasn't going well. And so after about 2 weeks after that happened, he and I had a falling out where like this just isn't working. So I ended up having to call Carole to come pick me up. And I'm back in Fort Wayne, and that's when I'm done.